So, yeah, my name is, as you see, it's James Halm. I've been here in January, it'll be 12 years. I've taught sociology for about 30, probably more than 30 years. And no, the last 10 years, I've changed my teaching style a lot. And this is kind of a summary of what it's become. You know, when I first started teaching, I was just doing what they told me to do, just talk the whole time. And then even before the pedagogy change, I'm just like, this can't go on, because I know I'm not reaching a lot of them. And so, you know, I just started doing more innovative. Back then, asking questions was even considered very innovative. Now, I teach sociology, so I know there's somebody in the audience here that he teaches sociology. But what I was going to do with each point, you know, was to ask you to think about, like, what you could do in your subject matter. You know, as far as doing, and maybe you do some of the stuff already, maybe you don't. I mean, really what this is a summary of the way I teach sociology. So I'm curious, what are some of the subjects that you teach? So if you go around and say your name and what you teach.
Hi, I'm Dulce Vasquez. I teach anatomy and physiology.
I'm Mary Ann Kennedy. I teach GED math.
Okay.
I'm Laura, biology.
Vince Regal, I teach chemistry.
Nicole Zampato, I teach educators in graduate courses, practitioners.
Okay.
Fazan Bori, I teach physics.
That's it. All right. You teach sociology.
Nicholas, I teach sociology.
And I'm Brian Alicia, I teach radiology.
Okay. So a lot of natural science, right? All right. Yeah. So, I mean, we all know that what we have to cover material. You know, we have to lecture somewhat. But what I do, try to do, if I can, I mean, some of it's preparation, some of it, I just remember something. Yeah, it's sharing experiences, stories, and applications, you know, when you're teaching. Like I remember the other day, it was last week, we were talking about in sociology, de jure and de facto segregation. You know, de jure is by law, de facto is not by law, but it's still there. I remember a story that my father told me. I was, you know, maybe 8, but it, you know, it happened around the time I was born, somewhere in the 60s. He had to go to a work conference in Atlanta. He had to get a hotel. While he was there, he saw, some of you might remember, do you remember the Rat Pack? Okay, right. Well, they wouldn't give Sammy Davis Jr. a room. He saw that. All right, and he told me, and everybody was sort of in. We might go to another hotel too. What that did was, it helped when I went to talk about de facto segregation, because they're talking about like where they live, you know, and maybe how segregated it is or how segregated it isn't. One class, we had a really good discussion about, you know, Chicago neighborhoods, why some are integrated, why some are more segregated. So like sharing stories and experiences, I think, helps a lot with that discussion. And like, especially when I get to a chapter on family, I come from a family with 12. So I have 11 siblings and an older brother and sister. So we talk about family dynamics, and how, you know, in this case, how size affects things. So we used to have to eat in 3 shifts, because we couldn't all fit in the kitchen table. So there was a shift at the dining room table, there was a shift and then there's people that just had to wait. Now the kids, the students with big families, they kind of knew, they understood. Or we talk about parenting in sociology. You know, I say how my dad was really strict. How, you know, my mother wasn't the disciplinarian. She would say, when your father gets, just wait till your father gets home. Some of us ran and hid under the bed. I would tell stories like that, and some of the students are like, well, my father was even worse. Here's what he did. And so you bring in the lecture where you're talking about strict parents, lenient parents, parents more in the middle, or even shared experiences about my love life and dating, and then they kind of do the same thing. It kind of opens it up. At the very beginning of an introduction to social course, it's difficult because you're giving background and you're talking about these guys that lived in the 1800s. It's a little more difficult, but once you get into the actual meat of the course, and they see that you're opening up to them, they start opening up to you. So I guess my question is, anybody do this kind of thing already? Where you're bringing in some kind of experiences. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I still remember this math teacher. He would talk about, you say like math. Wow, that would really be hard to bring things in. But no, he would always be talking about how carpenters use this part of geometry. Carpenters, engineers, and architects. One time there was even, I forget what his profession was, but he came in and he talked about how he used geometry in his line of work. So I think there's different applications. Even like when we're talking about social classes, I'm saying, okay, the middle class is defined this way, and the lower class and the upper class. Then I ask them to apply it. What class do you think you're in, and why? This can all be done at least partially through lectures. Does anybody do this kind of thing? Where they're sharing experiences, stories. Yes.
I was teaching today in my human biology class. That's where we learn a lot about. I prepare students who go and do CIS class, that's the upper level in human anatomy, physiology. So we were talking about structure of heart and see some of the diseases. What is heart attack really? What is aneurysm? Those type of things. So I didn't make a point to bring up how many people I personally know that have gone through this surgery. So this is serious. So we must understand, and even if you're not going to be doing anything with this major, as a good citizen, you should know, as a good family head or member, you should know what these things are, how to sort of, take good precautions to avoid it.
I think it kind of personalizes it.
Right.
You're telling them about other people, what they've gone through,
Right.
rather than it, just coming out of a book. Or, I've had compliments from students like, well, whatever, the last instructor I had, he just sounded like the book. I don't know. I don't even know. I didn't care who it was, but it's just like, it's probably a new teacher, because in the beginning, that's what I was doing, and then it's just like, no, that doesn't work. I learned you got to break it down more. And depending on the class too, every class is a little different. So, what works in one class might not work in another. That's some of the stuff that I think about. So, like at the end of the week or before the next week, okay, what are some ideas or, experiences that I can bring in to kind of liven it up a bit? Anybody else? What they might do, with their subject? You should be thinking about, any of these points, and just as food for thought, like, how, if your goal is to engage the students, I think these are some pretty good ideas. Yeah.
So I teach physics, and I teach physics at 3 different levels. I teach physics to future scientists and engineers who, since they've taken more math courses or just their training by the time they get to me, have better training in more abstract thinking, because there are parts of physics that we can all relate to, Like we all drive cars every day. We all know what is speeding. We all know that, stuff. But if I'm teaching something like electricity or magnetism, none of us have ever seen electrons moving, so it's something completely abstract.
Yeah.
Right? So when I had to teach physics to not just scientists but also to health science students, I try to tell them, remember each concept, you have to have a story behind that equation. You have two kids who are fighting over a toy, one kid pulls to the right with this much force, other kid pulls to the left. Which kid is going to win? It's like, oh, this kid is going to win. Okay, he was applying 400 Newton, this was applying 200. Well, this kid is going to win by how much? Oh, by 200. There you go. That's your Newton's law.
Yeah, I think it,
You need
Well,
to have a story behind
it makes it all relevant. Like in another college I teach at Morton, there's a chemistry teacher that she did this. She used art, brought it in with chemistry somehow. Now she's teaching a course about art and chemistry because I think students are maybe more into art than chemistry, at least to start out. They've taken art since they were in kindergarten or something, so they think of it as an everyday thing. Okay, chemistry is, I always feared the natural sciences, but if you brought something into it that I could relate to, which mine didn't, that would make it much easier for me to understand.
We had a chemistry professor who, in one of his classes, they made their pigments, and the students made some paintings out of those pigments that they made. It was pretty cool. Right,
Yeah.
our department.
Yeah, or like house paints, right? Like you're painting a house. Well, that's got chemistry in it. I mean, I bet some subjects will be harder to do this kind of thing, and it is more work, but I think you'd have more engagement, more of a successful class that way. Any other discussion? Okay, asking critical thinking questions. Okay, that list that you're looking at, that's a sample. See, what I do is I put up questions on Blackboard every week related to the content I'm covering. And some of these I would ask, while I'm lecturing. Other times, the class is going along, I happen to think of other questions to engage them, I will. So these are, they're scripted, we'll call it scripted questions and unscripted questions. And I think when I lecture, there's the pauses are questions. I'm always asking them questions, trying to get them to think. Some classes are more challenging. Some students don't want to participate. Other classes, they do, and sometimes that enthusiasm rubs off on the other students as well. And so definitely asking a lot of critical thinking questions is, I think, a good thing. And they tell us that we should be doing something like this to get them to think more about the subject matter. In a minute, I'll talk about doing that in groups. But I've seen professors that they never ask questions. I mean, I know of them. They just talk. There's no discussion. There's absolutely no engagement. And if you see the look at another school, and you see the look on the students, it's like they're comatose or something. Because for 50 minutes, they've just been sitting there listening to what one person has to say. Does anybody have other strategies they use during lecture to pull students in? engage them more?
Just want to make a point that, for, like, you're talking about 50-minute classes, I teach classes that are 2 hour, 45 minutes.
Oh, I do too in the summer.
But, for the amount of material is so daunting, that amount is really short. So there is not so much time for discussions or pulling the students in and having open-ended questions. So in some disciplines, some places during the semester, it's awfully tough.
Yeah, I've heard that in some subjects. I mean, what I did like 10 years ago, it's just like, I decided that, I could cut out some of the material. I don't know if you can. And that's what I did to make more room for that kind of thing. Like in the summer, when I have a 3-hour class, at least you don't have the time limit. I mean, my typical class, even in a 50-minute, is to lecture, ask questions, put them in groups with questions, show a couple of YouTube clips, and then I'll be talking about these in more detail. Simulation games, reviewing with Kahoot, just different approaches. And these aren't all my ideas. I have a peer tutor. My first peer tutor gave me the idea to use Kahoot, and it's worked out quite well. They get to use their cell phones and everything. They really like it. It's competitive. Shows you the top 5 people. It's another approach, I guess, to get them more involved. Does anybody do YouTube clips or some sort of visual? Yeah.
I mean, so like I was saying earlier, teaching like fairly abstract concepts. So I use a lot of animations, and I post those links. So any good website which has simulations, like, when we see collisions on the roads, teaching them momentum. Okay, after the collision, how will the cars move? And then they can have a discussion. They can say, okay, after collision is going to move this way, and then they can run the simulations and see if things that happen exactly the same. But if they happen differently, then they can have a discussion why were things different.
See, I started using this because my department chair at the time, who's also a sociologist, told me I needed more visuals. And another chair at another school said the same thing. And I said, well, what do? You do YouTube clips. So one summer, it was the summer actually where I had 2 classes and they got canceled. So I had more time to work on it. For all the courses I teach, I'll show you what I have here. This is a playlist. I have them for like Introduction to Sociology, Marriage and Family, and Social Problems. So I looked at my subject matter, all the chapters I do, and then I searched for clips, and then I watched them. Some of them I thought maybe it was too highbrow. Some of them I liked, I didn't like. The ones I liked, I put together a list with the help of people in this office, the Blackboard technologist that was here, not this one, or not the one before that, the one before that helped me, put together a list. And the chair here, gave me some ideas of, some things he showed. And it's worked out pretty well for the last 6 or 7 years that I've been doing it. So what I thought I would do is show you a clip, short one. There it is. Okay, the question, you've got it. It says, it's on the 3rd page. It says, do you have to speak Spanish to be a Latino? Why or why not? Now the name of it is, do you have to speak Spanish to be a Latino? That's a discussion question in and of itself. Why or why not? Does Spanish or any other language connect an individual to his or her ethnicity? Explain. Are there other ethnic traits that connect you to being Latino or any other ethnic group? So I thought we'd watch it and then even discuss that question. Now, I'd say my class is over half are Latino. In Morton College, I teach there too. Almost 100% are Latino. That's why we do a chapter on race and ethnicity. That's why I focus on that a lot, but I try to bring it into other racial and ethnic groups too. And in fact, the other day, last week I showed this, and there was a student who didn't speak Spanish, and she was quite intense. She says, "I'm Mexican. I don't know a word of Spanish, but anybody dares to say I'm not Mexican, they'll have to, face me, because I'm Mexican." She says, "We celebrate Day of the Dead. We eat Mexican food daily. I listen to their music. I'm Mexican, even though I don't speak Spanish." But let's see what. So this is like people interviewing Latinos about it.
Feel secure enough to let others in with Trusted Neighbor from ADT.
If you don't speak Spanish, then you should not call yourself a Latino. It's really hard. It's a very sticky situation.
Okay, whatever.
You gotta know your native language. You gotta know your people, your history.
Claro que sí. That's the most important thing.
My Spanish isn't up there, but I'm Boricua, and that's something I'm so proud of, and I will rep it to the day I die.
Of course. If you don't speak Spanish, you shouldn't represent.
It's not important in this country. You feel it? Not here, not in the U.S. Go to 42nd Street and ask for a towel in Spanish. See how many you're gonna get.
I think that if you don't speak Spanish, you should definitely get on that.
You think your kids will speak Spanish?
Oh yeah. Hell yeah, I'm gonna make them speak Spanish.
Everyone tells me I'm not a real Puerto Rican, and I'm just like, just because I don't speak Spanish?
I think there's a lack of understanding about language acquisition.
It's always something where I feel like I'm left out personally, or there's something that is missing from my own culture.
In America, it's kind of difficult because you're forced into this, just speak English, but that connects you to your, national identity, where you live at the moment. But then what about your cultural identity? What connects you to your old ancestors and to your people?
Okay, so look at that question. Do you have to speak Spanish to be a Latino? Are there other? This is like what I would do with the class after a club. Or I might put them in a group. Do you want to discuss it with somebody near you? You have a choice. So sometimes I give them a choice. We're going to discuss it as a class or with somebody else. And you're not answering like some of them. All right, well, what do you think?
First of all, if you're teaching I teach art, people have a choice of joining online or in class.
Uh-huh.
So right away, getting into groups is a big issue. It's very hard to put people in groups online. And
right,
I've never had success with that. I've tried.
No, you're right, because I didn't have success either when I.
So that eliminates kind of like group work.
Yeah.
When I'm teaching.
You can have them collaborate on a document together, so they can have a conversation in a document.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps, I guess I think when I'm teaching math, that might be superfluous, you know what I mean? And when you're teaching to a math, like teaching to the GED math test, limited time, like you say, you know, to teach the content,
Mhm.
and I just feel like I can't do any fluff. Although I know the fluff is good and it's not fluff, but I just feel real compelled to cover where I need to cover. And then,
Okay.
yeah, but
Do you think like any ethnicity, do you have to speak, you know, like me, I'm part Irish. I don't speak Gaelic, but there are times I feel Irish, you know, around St. Patrick's Day. And I remember stories about my great-grandparents from Ireland.
I think I'm a first generation immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
So as a first generation immigrant, you know, English is not my first language, even though I was studying it like from age 4.
Okay.
So there is a big argument like about people who grew up here. So when I first came here, I would say I felt like all the American-born Pakistanis who didn't know Urdu, that they should really make an effort to learn Urdu. But after spending some time, like, you know, you're growing up in this culture, right? You want to connect more with this culture and, you know, your identity and the language, which is English. So people who made an effort to learn Urdu, you do appreciate them more, but you really can't hold it against them. So, so I think it's also, there are a couple of other fault lines, not just about like people speaking Spanish or not Spanish. We should probably also see how many of those people are first or second generation immigrants. And if we see this,
Right, we do that. There's, before we get to that, there's a part on assimilation, and I talk about like a first generation, you know, and I use language with it. I mean, we do that before we get to this part. You know, like the girl that didn't know any Spanish is like third or fourth generation. Yeah. Most of the students that are, you know, a few are immigrants, but most of them seem to be like second children of immigrants. And they say the same thing. I go home, it's my native language and culture. I come here, I'm American. There's one question, which that's the next point, student discussion groups. Usually I give them questions like these. There's a question there, in which, it's on the second page at the top. In which situations or parts of your life are you ethnic and American? And then I give them criteria to consider. Is one stronger than the other? Are both equal? And usually the best answers I get are the ones that are like second generation, because they're experiencing both of them. And it's interesting too, because some of them, it's about half and half. About half will say they feel more American, and the other half will say they feel more ethnic. And then the students are curious, and, you know, they want to know why, and they usually explain why. So these questions are supposed to generate discussion, and then they can generate even discussion beyond the question. I mean, I don't like falling behind, but sometimes I'm willing to take the risk if it means, you know, they're going to get more discussion. And also with the groups, they actually get to meet different people. You know, like some classes I used to see people I'd never get to really know them. I mean, I allow them to like go a little bit beyond the question. Like, you know, sometimes I hear, what are you doing this weekend, blah, blah, blah. And I've had students that develop friendships by the end of the semester. Usually I let them pick their groups. At the beginning I do. Well, no, at the beginning I assign them more, that's right. Then, you know, as they get to meet people, and they feel more comfortable, then I start letting them pick their own. And there's only like 2-3 people per group. Because when I first started doing that, yeah, there were too many people in a group and not everybody was participating.
So what do you do with cases where students don't participate? Do you walk around and facilitate? Do you?
Well, I have a peer tutor,
Okay.
and so she'll sit with the ones that like aren't as likely to participate.
Okay.
Usually I'll walk around, and if they're not, they start. Usually, in other words, I don't have to say anything. I did have a student one time, maybe about 4 years ago, that refused to do any participation or anything. I just said, okay, privately, that part of your grade is going to be a 0. I said, I don't want to hear any complaints. And she's just like, all right. And I didn't hear any complaints from her. But that's rare. Usually I'll say, well, if nobody wants to say anything more, then I'll just talk. They'll start talking. They like the interaction. And it helps when I'm lecturing to ask questions, because they've already met students and discussed it with them. They feel more comfortable with it. Like one of these questions here, the one at the bottom of the page, should Columbus Day continue to be a holiday? That got a real good discussion. Today I brought it up in the context of colonialism. And 26, I did my research, 26 states don't celebrate it. I think there's, of the 24, like us, we call it Indigenous People Day. Some people still call it Columbus Day. Some people call it National Discoverers or Explorers Day. I thought it was interesting. Well, here it's Indigenous People Day. And there's still a Columbus Day parade. They had it yesterday. As part of the question is basically, what do we do about the Italians' ethnic attachment to Columbus Day? Okay. In Colorado, they came up with it. They picked another Italian, a nun, Mother Cabrini. So they get the first Monday in October off for that. The second Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day. But I noticed too, I watched a little bit of the Columbus Day parade. They had, they were celebrating Indigenous people as well. There were some floats. And there was a really good discussion about it. In fact, one person came up with an idea. What do you guys think? Should we keep the holiday? Should we call it Indigenous Peoples Day? In Ohio, they call it Columbus Day. I see why. Columbus, Ohio. Or should we just come up with another name? A student of mine said, I call it Ethnic Appreciation Day. Then we're not offending anybody, no matter, regardless of what you are. Of course, they complain that they don't get the day off. They should get the day off, but that was the thinking. Now, does anybody do groups? Yeah.
Like group discussions? Or?
Yeah, do you give them scripted questions or like this?
Most presentations, they're a little less in-depth than this. But
okay.
Reflect on the material, and then when they aren't participating, I go up to every group individually. So what are you thinking? And discuss with them.
Yeah, I do that. I do that like for a couple of them, right? And the peer tutor does that. You should look into getting a peer, if anybody's interested. That helps with the discussions, because it's another student, it's a peer like them. I've noticed that helps a lot, especially at the beginning of the semester when they're afraid of the teacher kind of thing. They'll go more to her than me, and then later on I start getting more emails.
I do groups, but they're sort of predetermined. This is your project. So you're going to sit down, look up information. Don't just copy paste ChatGPT. You got to make a product, and based on that product, I'm going to grade. What I'm gonna ask you, how do you grade your discussions?
How do I?
Mm-hmm.
I
Like,
walk
meeting
around
so
and
people who are discussing, so just participation, is that enough, or do they have to
Well,
produce something?
the groups are small, and usually, they're all participating. If I walk around, and if I think, they're getting off topic, I let them know. But I mean, I don't grade them on like being right or wrong. I mean, as long as they're participating and sharing ideas, that's what's important. Yeah.
So I usually I tell them, okay, this is going to be a class exercise. I'm going to discuss a new topic. We're going to build a new situation. I'm going to solve that problem of physics. Then I'm going to change it. You guys are going to work in groups and solve it. Once you're done solving, you can have discussions with yourself. You can even ask me for help.
Right.
But once you solve it, email your solution, and you get 1 bonus point for it. For every 4 bonus points, you're going to get a 1% bump at the end of the course.
Mm-hmm.
You submit 16 of them, you get a 4% bump, which means if you're at 86%, you get bumped to 90%. So there's one benefit that I'm deliberately doing it. I'm just open about it. I want you to be more involved in the class. So I'm encouraging you. This is a way of encouraging you. And I can just take the exact same question we saw during our discussion, and I can put it in the quiz or an exam.
Right.
So stay involved.
That's one of my points too, that what I do with these questions is, I'll talk about that in a minute. There's like writing assignments based off them. Anybody else do some sort of, one of the things I do is a chapter on family where we talk about parenting. I give them what if situations. There's a list of like a dozen things, like what would you do if your child threw a temper tantrum in the store. This is after we talk about like the different parenting styles, strict, lenient, in between. Or, what would you do if your child came home with all D's and F's on their report card? A bunch of what if situations, and they really like that, and they end up most of the time bringing in the material. Like, I wouldn't be this lenient parent. And what I find interesting, they see sometimes like, well, I could see if I was a parent with some kids, I could be more lenient, but with other kids, I might have to be stricter. And they kind of reflect on their own experiences. Some of them actually say, now I see why my parents were hard on me sometimes. I didn't see it then, but I kind of see it now. Of course, most of them don't have experience as parents, but they have experience as children. And I do have a few students that say, no, I would do differently from my parents. They were, usually it's like they were too strict, they were too lenient. There's got to be some kind of structure. So a lot of this is just creativity, coming up with ways to engage them and still learn the material. And I think they learn the material better when they're applying it and when they're using it. All right. Anybody use games? It could be online games or other games. This is a game that actually, it's called Star Power. Is it there? I'll read you the first paragraph here. It says, this is a game. This is for the chapter on class inequality. We're looking at social classes. This is a game in which a low mobility, 3-tiered society is built through the distribution of wealth in the form of chips. So there's these little plastic chips with different colors. Certain colors are worth more. And everybody starts with 5 chips. They can trade them. They can keep what they got. There's rules in here for how to play it for the first 2 rounds. Third round is the most interesting. Okay, by this time you have an upper, middle, and a lower class. Okay, the upper class gets to make the rules. And almost always, they do just like we think of our upper class, right? Usually they do things to benefit themselves and not everybody else, and that's exactly what they do. So these few in the upper class, they find ways to take some of the chips away from the other players. And sometimes you get a class struggle, like what not a revolution like what Karl Marx is, that sometimes the lower classes will challenge it, sometimes they won't. And it's good because you can bring in, there's a question on here, I think it's the last one. Explain how the star power game illustrates concepts in class. Is this a good game? Is this game a good example of what goes on in the United States? Then they like that because they say, yeah, it's like with the tax laws. The tax laws favor the wealthy, and that's why the rest of us are paying more. They rigged the system. That kind of like what the upper class did in this game. They rigged it so they would have most of the wealth, and they tried to brainwash us into thinking it was okay. And then I say, well, what concept does that illustrate? They don't always get it. Some people say, oh, that's what you were talking about, Karl Marx's false consciousness. Trying to make the rest of us think it's okay so that we won't challenge it. And I still remember a class, and I've been using this since I started teaching. I remember one class their revolution was they snuck and stole all the chips from the upper class and said, okay, classless society, game over. Because they were fed up with, I said, what does that mean? You found out, you saw the true light. What does Marx call that? Oh, class consciousness. Yeah, so games are good because they help review the material, and it's something different. You know, basically with this game, you put up some charts so they know the point scale for the chips, some rules. They got to get up out of their seat, pick chips and go to the board and write their points. So they're moving around all the time. Anybody use a type of simulation game when you're teaching? And this comes around close to the middle of the semester. I think about 10 days ago we did this. And I split it into 2 days because I felt it was more effective to do it. The first 2 rounds at the end of a class and then the final round at the beginning of another. And like it says here, you can tailor it for a whole class or parts of a class. I used to do a board game, but I can't find it anymore. It's called Oppression, where they would get cards. And if it was something oppressive, you had to move back a few. Or sometimes it was something positive. But it was showing that, for every step we go forward, sometimes we go back. And the oppression could have been based on income, wealth, race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation. But they were like cards giving them information about things. And then Kahoot, that's another one. Kahoot's good to review for anything. Does anybody use Kahoot?
It limits you to 10 though.
10 what?
10 participants.
Oh, really? Because with mine.
Maybe you buy. I'm looking for free games.
No, this is free.
Right.
I can do 30 participants.
Oh, I've only been able to do 10.
That's odd.
And Jeopardy Labs is also really good.
Right?
JeopardyLabs.com. Yeah.
How does that work?
It brings up a Jeopardy game. You put in your search criteria, it brings up a Jeopardy game. Yeah.
You can look at it's the same as Kahoot, and they might offer more options for the free version.
Look.
Yeah, ELOOKET.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, in fact, I do this, or I give 4 exams typically, and then I do this sort of a practice test before the exam. yeah, it's not the same as. They're going to get similar questions on there, and if they paid any amount of attention. I used to have study guides. Once I started using Kahoot, I got rid of it. I thought I didn't need it. And that wasn't even my idea. This was my first peer tutor, or what they call peer tutor or peer mentor. Said, hey, we should do Kahoot. I go, show me how it works. Okay, and then we made up questions, and I've been using it ever since. Or at the very beginning of the semester, when I'm talking about the history of sociology, it's kind of dry. Part of it is I do a Kahoot setup, see if they've been listening, and then there's a YouTube. Actually, I talk a little bit about the history of sociology. Then you see a YouTube clip, which is very good at summarizing it all. And then to wind it up, there's questions. And they do pretty well with it. I mean, they like anything where they can use their cell phone. And, you know, there are sometimes like the chapter on politics where I say, okay, take out your cell phone. We're looking at Republicans and Democrats. You know, where did the elephant come from? Find out. Or, you know, the colors of the parties. Or sometimes wow. I should be asking them to look it up, so they look it up. That's what I told them the first day. You will be using your cell phone. It's like, I don't want you, on your cell phone, texting somebody, but I mean, we will be using the cell phone for this game and, other things. So, okay, I got to look into that Jeopardy version. Anybody use other type of review strategies? And they're all familiar with Kahoot because it seems like they all used it in high school. Okay, writing assignments. Like with those questions. These are short, but you can do longer ones. Okay, so for 10 weeks, they can pick questions. Any 3 from, that week. And, it has to be, I forget the parameters, 7 to 9 sentences. Most of the time, they're pretty good. And a lot of the time, it helps with the discussion because if they've answered that question, they've written about it, and then I ask that question in class, some of them will say, I want to talk, I answered that question this week. Here's what I had to say. So it helps with the discussion. And, there's an emphasis in all our classes to have them write. So it overlaps with all the other things that they're writing. You could do I've done longer ones where they're maybe 2 to 3 pages. And some of them might involve doing just a little research. But it's a way to tie it all together for them. How about the rest of you? Do your writing assignments tie into, what you're teaching and, the ways you're teaching?
I do something similar. I do weekly journals.
Okay.
I tell them to keep it under 100 words because I don't want to read that much, and I want them to focus on just like thinking quickly or something, maybe applying it to their own life. And then I grade those. I collect them at midterms, so I give them time. Like,
oh, okay.
If they miss one, they can catch up with it.
I'm curious, what do they usually write about?
So I do provide a prompt. I tried my very first semester to just let them ride, and they had a lot of trouble. They asked me what to write about. I was like, anything about the subject we're learning, and they're like, okay, well, I want a bit more. So I do provide prompts now, and they follow the prompts pretty much 100%.
So what kind of prompts do you give them?
If I'm teaching on gender and family, I ask, what is an example of gender socialization you've seen
okay.
in your life course, and what is that what is the value it's teaching or something like that.
Okay.
So it's pretty close to what I'm teaching. It's less critical thinking, more.
Well, critical thinking, application.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's good. I mean, yeah, sometimes maybe, what I'm asking is a little too long, but, whatever works. And do they ever, talk about them in class or?
Not as much. I try to use them as I want you to think about it. I want you to see that sociology is visible throughout the day,
Right.
Your average day. So it's less about coming to class with it prepared. Also because I don't collect them all, grade them every week. I don't expect them to have it ready to go.
Yeah.
Calling on people.
Yeah.
So not as much.
So do they physically write it out, or do they type it?
It's on Blackboard.
Okay.
Yeah, so I provide one every week on Blackboard. I have some students ask me, starting the day on Tuesday, where's the prompt? I'm like, I'm working on it.
But that's good. They want to know where the prompt is.
So I teach online. I have them blog, and they have to blog publicly. So it provides a little bit more authenticity and real world application, and I tend to get higher quality because they know everybody's looking. And
okay.
Their responses also need to be public, and they're responding to classmates' blogs.
Okay.
Do you have set up a WordPress or
I have them. I give them the option. I don't like WordPress. Normally, I'll have them, or I'll kind of encourage them to go with Blogger because it's owned by Google and it integrates with everything. But they can use whatever they want.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is for, I don't teach here, I'm the director of distance learning here, but I teach for other universities, and they blog outside of the LMS.
Okay.
So not in the LMS at all, because I want it to be public. But they do have, that being said, they do have the option to either blog under a pseudonym or blog within the LMS if there's a safety concern. And I've done it for about 10 years, and literally, I've had 3 people ever have to blog inside for either safety reasons or they didn't want their bosses to know they were going back to school. So.
Yeah. I mean, if it's an online course, I mean, I've been focusing on traditional classes. I heard of discussion boards. They do a lot of that. Some blogs. But yeah, I remember when I was teaching on Zoom, it was hard to do, like you were saying, the group stuff. Yeah, it was very difficult. So yeah, I kind of pushed that to the side. But I had some classes, surprisingly enough, on Zoom, where I had better discussion than some classes I had in a classroom. I still remember this class. It was, I think it was spring of 2021, and they said, can we stay afterwards and continue to discuss the topic? And I said, yeah. But I mean, if you got another class, go to your class. I don't want you missing that. And we did that a couple times. And then also, that was the semester I was supposed to be observed. And I thought, this is the class I'm picking. Show that, how engaged they are. Even now, I have 3 classes. One is very engaged. Another one, there could be more improvement. Another one that I had to think about more. Like the other day, it's just they're just not going to discuss this. So what I did was I had them during class, write down ideas. And the others, I didn't need to do it, but then I did. I mean, then there was at least some discussion going on. Not as good as in the other 2, but it forced them to sit down and think about it. So sometimes you have to think of another way to reach them. And we all know we're not going to reach every student, and some classes are going to be more difficult to reach than others. But I think this is a lot better for them than just talking the whole time and not doing anything else. Okay, so I guess now we're on the last point, strategies, reactions, questions, conclusions. I've never done this before. I mean, I've never done a presentation here. So I am a little nervous, I'll admit it, but as we went on, I felt more comfortable.
Do you have any experience with different class times, or certain level of participation? I teach at 8 a.m. class.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's difficult to get them to say a word.
Right. Yeah, like earlier in the day is sometimes a problem. But like, okay, you would think the 9 o'clock class was the problem. It's the 11 o'clock class for me. 10 o'clock one's the best. The 9 o'clock is somewhere in the middle. I mean, we try to like figure out what's going on, but I think it's really just the mix of students that you get. You get some that you just happen to get a group that wants to talk. And unfortunately, sometimes you get a group of people that don't want to talk. But I've seen it where I've had classes that they start out that way and they get better as the semester goes on. I mean, that makes you feel good that, they're doing better. I've even had a few times, not very often, where they start out and then they get worse, but not that often. It's more the other way.
Do you have conflicts in class?
Not too many. I mean, this was a long time ago, this was before COVID. I mean, I had somebody that came to class that, had a chip on his shoulder, and I would just ask him to leave, and he would leave usually. And then I went to my department chair, and we figured it out.
During one summer, I was teaching a class, and it was a relatively smaller class. So I divided them into 2 houses.
Mm-hmm.
And both houses were getting scores based on like all the activities. So it was pretty good. They had good competition going on between the houses.
Yeah, they seem to like competition. Like a Kahoot or something. Any final comments? I have a minute.
I think overall we kind of have to tailor our techniques to our classes and our students, because we can gauge from the beginning, what we have to do to get them to talk a little bit more compared to the other class. They'll talk on their own.
Right.
So we have to be adaptable.
Right,
with our techniques.
like I said, like with that class last week, I had to, maybe if they just sit down and write their ideas down first, and that seemed to work better. Then it's food for thought for the next time, that they're like that. Or, sometimes you just don't, sometimes you're not expecting it, and then they're just so talkative for some reason. Sometimes it's things like this, the weather. I notice on days where it's cold and rainy, blustery, they don't want to talk as much. So sometimes it's factors beyond our control. But, we're like in baseball. You want to be a good pitcher, you're going to have good days, bad days, but you're in there trying, right? All right, well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.